Hello, everyone. Hello. My name is Edward Park, and I'm the founder of Neuro Reserve. And hello. Hello, everyone. Hi. My name's Ed Park, and I'm the founder of Neuro Reserve. And today we are going to be joined by Annie Fenn. And Annie Fenn is one of our medical advisors and the founder of the Brain Health Kitchen. So we're going to have her come on in here right now and with an IG Live on some late-breaking 2022 research updates in the Alzheimer's and dementia space. So,
hi, Ed.
Hey, Annie. How
Hi.
you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing good. Are you okay after coming back from all these travels?
Well, I just took a few minutes to clean up my office, which is an absolute mess. Yeah, I'm actually feeling really good.
Okay. Well, I was just introducing you to everyone. So to everyone who's watching now or who
Hi,
will watch
everybody.
later, this is Annie Fenn. Annie Fenn is the founder of Brain Health Kitchen. She is an expert. She's a physician, and she's an expert culinary expert. So she's does
I'm a cook.
instruction. I want to say culinary expert because it's highbrow, and that's where you're at. So, but it's you instruct people, you do lectures around the world on the topic of brain health and particularly Alzheimer's type dementia and preventing it with food. And we're just it's a privilege and a pleasure to have you as an advisor to Neuro Reserve. And we have a lot to go over today because
We do.
we kind of bit off more than we could chew. I got like a pile of papers here to my left that nobody can see right now, thankfully.
It's a good thing my jet lag is resolved after attacking that pile of papers you sent me.
But what we wanted to do is we wanted to go through as we end 2022. We wanted to, as we go into the holidays, there's a lot of research that's happened this year, a lot of highlights, a lot of good, big breaking news in Alzheimer's and dementia research and prevention. And we wanted to kind of bring it all together and talk about it and give people some perspectives and also some takeaways from it so that people can just be more educated and also people can take action as well and be very confident in what's going on out there and what they could do about it. So
It's also true in our field, like most fields in media, the good news doesn't really seem to get a lot of press.
yeah.
So there'll be a lot of negative findings, or we'll talk about the amyloid controversy. That gets a lot of attention, but there have been some real gems, like some real advances in Alzheimer's research this year. So hopefully we can bring that to light.
Yes, absolutely. And so we wanted to cover 4 areas today. So one is going to be the latest in mind diet research because, the mind diet is amazing. So it is an amazing gift that keeps on giving when it comes to research and its benefits for people cognitively. So I want to cover that. We want to cover the amyloid beta controversy in case that's been confusing some people and that news. We want to cover more in women's health and Alzheimer's and dementia prevention. And then finally, if we get to it, then omega-3s also, because even though, people seem, there's a lot of talk about omega-3s obviously out there, it also is a gift that keeps on giving. There's a lot more that we're learning about and getting better with. So I think the way we wanted to divide it up is that, Annie, you were going to take like the mind one, and I was going to take the next one, and you were going to take the next one. So, we'll just kind of get started here. And let's go with the latest in the mind diet, which is what Annie really cooks to. It's just, she takes it to all these sorts of higher levels, right? But like, so Annie cooks to it, we develop our products around it in Neuro Reserve. So it's like, it's a neat diet. So
Yeah.
tell us
So just a little review for people who might not know about the mind diet. The mind diet study came out of Rush University. Dr. Martha Claire Morris was a lead researcher. And this came out in 2015. I was so impressed by this paper that it's what basically spurred me to focus on Alzheimer's prevention in my culinary school. It's pretty much what convinced me I should have a whole cooking school called Brain Health Kitchen, because the results were so astounding. And they continue to be replicated in other countries. The Mind Diet is now an ongoing trial, which we should be getting data soon, I hope, which will be even more positive. But it just keeps showing positivity. Basically, what the researchers did is they took the Mediterranean diet, which we knew has astounding benefits in terms of cardiovascular risk reduction and Alzheimer's reduction. And Dr. Morris and her partners said, what if we took the Mediterranean diet and made it even more brain healthy by adding more neuroprotective foods like berries and leafy greens and things like that? So that's what they did. That's what the Mind Diet is. It's a brain-specific Mediterranean diet. And it has 10 food groups that are thought to be brain healthy, 5 that are thought to be less healthy. They actually are shown to accelerate decline. And the Mind Diet score comes from eating more from the 10 brain healthy food groups and less from the brain unhealthy ones. So that's the Mind Diet from 2015. Now, since then, they've been updating and doing it again in other countries. Australia did a Mind Diet study, got the exact same risk reduction, which was 53% over 4.5 years in the people that followed it the most closely.
That's a big number. Big. If you can reduce risk in half in anything, that's a huge number. So
yeah, because we don't really have any interventions, dietary or otherwise, that can reduce Alzheimer's risk to that degree in a short degree of time as well. So that got a lot of people's attention. Certainly got my attention. So now we're just looking at the Mind Diet from all these different angles, which is really, really interesting. There was a paper earlier this year that showed that following the Mind Diet reduces breast cancer risk by 60%. Did you see that one, Ed?
No, I didn't. I wasn't keeping track of that one. So
yeah, I forgot to send you that one. That one was great. And then there was another one that looked at the Mind Diet in terms of Parkinson's disease risk. And the risk reduction was actually astounding, especially in women. It was somewhere between 40 and 60%, depending on male or female. But the women who followed it had something like 17 years of delay in Parkinson's diagnosis, which I think is I don't think we have anything else that we know of that can reduce the risk of Parkinson's to that degree.
No. And it's just amazing how they're taking this diet and applying it in so many different places. You know, I don't know if they're going to be able to call it the Mind Diet, you know, after maybe 10 or so years of this. You know, they're just going to have to call it like the super diet or something like that.
Yeah,
you know?
It's basically the brain health diet. Yeah, exactly. So the studies that we were both looking at, one came up very recently in the journal Nature. Looked at Mind Diet in a population of healthy women who were overweight. Okay, so we know that obesity is a risk factor. It's one of the modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. That we know, and the reason for that is not all that clear. You know, if you take out cardiovascular risk, take out other chronic illnesses like diabetes, and you just have someone who's overweight but healthy, it's not very clear why it's still a risk factor. So this study actually tackled that, which I think was brilliant. They took, it was small but interesting. They took 37 women, their BMI was between 30 and 50. And what they did was they followed them on a Mind Diet versus a low-calorie diet. And they looked at cognitive performance in the brain. What they found that just 3 months on a Mind Diet, they actually had improved performance in the brain. And then when they looked at their brains with MRIs, they showed that there were structural changes in the brain that were improved in just 3 months by switching to a Mind Diet.
And you know, I was looking at that, and one of the things about it is what they're doing now, and what you mentioned earlier, is that they're taking the Mind Diet and they're putting it into RCTs, these randomized controlled trials. You know, they're more rigorous than I guess cross-sectionals or observational studies, right? So that's I think that's a really neat development, that they're really controlling things. They have a control group, and they're just, you know, they're I think they were visiting them, you know, every week, and just to make sure they were adhering to it and making sure. That's a big problem.
The study design was really good. I think we're coming out of the old era, like back when I was in medical school, like a really long time ago. The nutrition studies were just not that designed very well, so doctors just didn't regard them very highly. We're definitely coming out of that era. We're seeing nutrition studies that are with rigorous designs And this study, even though it's small, super interesting. It raises a lot of good questions. And hopefully we will see this in a larger RCT in the future.
Yes, yes. And so here's my peanut gallery thought on it. When I read through a little bit of it, I noticed that for the wine, they substituted, instead of wine, they used grape juice, raisins, and currants. So in case people want to substitute for wine, the grape and grape juice, raisins, currants, those dark colored kind of, that fruits, those could be a good stand-in for the wine. At least in this case here is what they did. So I
Yeah,
thought
that's definitely a good substitute for skipping the alcohol, because it includes all those antioxidants that you find in red wine, a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
So that was one study. Okay, the other study, this is probably my favorite study of 2022.
Nice.
It's the one, Kaplan, the Direct Plus trial. And this is about the Green Med diet. Mm-hmm. So I did a little Brain Health Kitchen journal club on this. When it first came out, I was so excited. If you scroll very far back in my Instagram, maybe like mid-year, there's 4 or 5 slides on this. And I just really thought that this study was very well done. So over in Israel, the researchers, just like Dr. Morris at Chicago at Rush, they looked at the Mediterranean diet and they said, how can we make it more brain specific? But someone from Israel told me they don't have a lot of berries there. So they were looking at other antioxidant rich foods. Other foods are rich in polyphenols. So this has a great study design. What they did was they took 294 participants, which is really great. They followed them for 18 months with both brain MRI and cognitive testing. So the participants got an MRI at the beginning of the study and then 18 months later, which is enough to see, significant structural changes.
And bear in mind that study that you just spoke about, right? That was 3 months only. So this is 18 months. Like,
yeah. 18
time.
months is probably more the gold standard, right? For looking at brain MRI and seeing differences. So they asked all participants, all 300 people, to cut back on processed meat, number 1. And number 2, they gave them a free gym pass and encouraged them to exercise every day. Really important, right?
Yep.
Those things are independently associated with reducing your Alzheimer's risk. And then they divided them into 3 different dietary categories. One was the Mediterranean diet, which is the Mediterranean diet that we've known for decades. It's like the Mind diet, but it doesn't differentiate berries and leafy greens. It's a little bit more fish heavy and maybe a little more dairy heavy than the Mind diet, but it's basically the old Mediterranean diet we've been quoting forever. And then they came up with something called the Green Med diet, which is the Mediterranean diet supplemented with walnuts, about 1/4 cup a day, green tea, 3 to 4 cups a day, and something called a mankai green shake. And a mankai is it's a microgreen that they created or grew just for the study, and they made these super green shakes out of it. So everyone had one of these green shakes every day.
And it's like an aquatic plant, right? It's like almost like when you see like those layers of green on a pond or something like that. Like that's sort of an aquatic plant, right?
Yes, and I guess they were able to standardize the amount of flavonoids they were getting by using this one type of plant, because they particularly wanted to focus on 3 flavonoids: camphorol, quercetin, and catechin. That's what the mankai provides. Okay, so that's the Green Med diet, the Mediterranean diet with walnuts, a lot of green tea, and a green shake. And then the third arm was just another healthy diet that was reduced calorie. So what they showed was the reduced calorie diet didn't really even compare to the Mediterranean or the Green Med. So that one's out, right? Didn't really have any stellar results. The Green Med diet outperformed the Mediterranean diet, especially in brain volume, okay? And this was especially true in people over the age of 50. So people that are over the age of 50 on the Green Med diet, they showed a slower reduction in the volume of their brain, especially in the hippocampus, the memory center.
Yep.
That was really, really interesting. And then they also had better cognitive testing overall.
Yeah, I like that they looked at people specifically over 50. I know that they noted that in the paper where they said, brain atrophy and obviously cognitive decline, that begins to accelerate, in people's 50s. So that's where they wanted to kind of take a look at a cutoff there. And it was big. I mean, the differences were huge. I mean, they took everybody together and they saw a little bit of decline. They did like everybody above 50, and all of a sudden they benefited a lot more.
Yes. Yes. And they even broke it down like the people that had a low intake of walnuts had a smaller brain volume. The people that had a medium intake of walnuts versus a large intake of walnuts, which was a quarter cup 5 times a week.
I was trying to figure out how they tracked that. They must have really kept good track, because I saw that too. I was like, low, medium, and high. I'm like, I thought they would just keep it simple and just say, you either take it all or you don't, or something like that. But, you know.
Right. And then the green tea as well, they were able to, you know, track it based on how many cups of green tea you drink in a day. I don't know how many cups of green tea you can drink in a day, but I usually can do 1 matcha, which I count as 2 cups.
One right here.
And sometimes I can do another one as well. So I'm up to like 3 a day. I think that's probably all I can do. So the conclusion was really, really great. Of course, you can't take out that exercise piece. You can't take out the fact that they cut back on processed meat. I think it's important for these days to combine those factors because we know they're all working together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, these 2 studies, again, you know, this study that you're describing here is a randomized controlled trial. Once again, you know, they really, you know, took it up a level there. And so we have now 2 randomized controlled studies that came out this year in the Mind Diet, and one of them here was 18 months. So, and I think the great story here is the polyphenols, like that upping of polyphenols, kind of adding that on top of just what a standard Mediterranean diet is. Just makes a big difference. And I go back, and so I was trying to think of like, what's the impact of the previous study you spoke about, and that one there was another thing I remember about it. Okay, and that is when they looked at dietary intakes on that study of the women in that study, they noticed that their intake when they were on the Mind Diet arm of the study of monounsaturated fats and fiber were significantly higher than the other groups. So now you can see the impacts having, you can see these effects having their impact in different places. You have more fiber, more monounsaturated fatty acids in the first study. In this study, they're really leaning into polyphenols, and that's where the impact is being made. It's just, you know, all these different factors are coming together from the Mind Diet, you know.
It's true. So. It's true. Yeah, it's really nice to see how it's all coming together. A couple more quick ones about the Mind Diet was the one about open-angle glaucoma. And I also really love this story. This study had a very clean design, and it showed that being on the Mind Diet can really protect you neurodegeneration of the eye. We don't really think of the eye as part of the brain, but the structures are super similar. And the Mind Diet, how much reduction did they get? This was a large study based on the Rotterdam study, which is an ongoing study of people in Holland that they've been following for decades. And the more adherent they had to the Mind Diet, but not the Mediterranean diet in this one, the lower their risk of open-angle glaucoma. So the higher your Mind Diet score, the lower your risk of...
It was like, I think it dropped like 74% or something like that. It was so...
Isn't that crazy? I know, and I'm always concerned about eye health and, you know, eye health as I age, and you know, I'm at the age where I get an eye exam every year, and this is just something that is simple to be done that can reduce your risk by that much. It's crazy.
So now you've covered the Mind Diet and benefits in breast cancer, obviously Mind Diet and cognition, Mind Diet and its impact on the brain size as people age, and then on top of that now in Mind Diet and eye health. So,
and then there's one more. There's one more, and I really like this thing too, because I'm a little obsessed with grip strength. Ever since I learned years ago that grip strength is associated with longevity. So they specifically looked. This was the Telgalkar study of 1,358 women and men, mean age 68. Better Mind Diet adherence is associated with greater grip strength and less functional impairment with age. So just doing, you know, that simple grip strength test you do?
Yeah.
I was just at the orthopedic doctors recently, and they did that on me. And I'm like, how did I do? Because I'm always concerned that with age it goes down. So my grip strength is good, luckily, but it's associated with so many other things in terms of fending off frailty, fending off just general decline with age. And the mind diet, like the better your mind diet score, the lower your grip strength.
Mm-hmm.
Or the higher grip
Mm-hmm.
strength and lower your frailty.
Yeah, that's a great test. I mean, one of our some of our other medical and scientific advisors, I was in a conversation with them, and they were like, they pointed out the study, and they said, you know what, grip strength, like that's one of the easiest, clearest ways to see, you know, that the that's associated with frailty and,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously, you know, mortality, things like that. So, so at
Right.
first I was thinking, why grip strength? Because, you know, I'm kind of an ignoramus on grip strength, right? So I'm like, why grip strength? You know, and then as I learned more about it, I'm like, wow, it's a really useful tool, you know,
Yeah.
to
It's a
study.
useful tool. And there's also been studies on leg strength, you know, the degree of strength you have in your legs might also have something to do with your Alzheimer's risk. So it was a really good year for the mind diet studies. And we're all waiting for the results of the mind diet trial, which was a little bit
Right.
delayed because of COVID, but hopefully we'll have those results to talk about soon.
Yes, that'd be great. Hopefully, yeah, maybe like at the beginning of 23, or I don't know who, you know, we don't know when it's going to pop out, but at some point it'll pop out the other end. So,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, we can devote a little bit of time. I don't know how many people here are, you know, have heard, you know, earlier on this year where there was some controversy about amyloid beta. You know, how Annie was saying earlier that, you know, a lot of times just all the negative news kind of comes out and just dominates the news cycle, you know, and so, and they had discovered that someone could have fraudulently shown or tried to demonstrate fraudulently that amyloid beta plaques, which are those plaques that grow in most people's brains who have Alzheimer's, were the culprit, or the cause of Alzheimer's for them. And the person did it presumably by doctoring or changing the images that they used for their papers. And the important part of that is that one of their papers was a seminal paper, meaning it was like one of the papers that really kicked off all of this research in amyloid beta plaques, and eventually motivated many pharmaceutical companies to invest a lot of money into it, the NIH to invest a lot of money into it, and to learn about it, to possibly develop drugs about it or for it. And so that actually, it's very likely that there was some malpractice going on there. Actually, there's some excellent forensic science that had been done to kind of look at and analyze those images that were made to make it appear as though amyloid were more causative, if you will, than maybe the images or the data that they originally had would
Yeah,
suggest.
it's really disappointing, and I think everyone in science who's doing it for all the right reasons, it just, you know, it's just so disappointing. But I think there's also a misconception that that was like the only study that prompted a lot of research in this direction to find a drug that blocks amyloid. And it was really one of hundreds of drugs. Like in a lot of fields, a lot of scientists are coming to the same conclusions from lots of different angles.
Yeah.
People are working on the same thing all over the place in so many different labs. This was just one of the labs. So it doesn't mean that amyloid is not part of the whole reason people get Alzheimer's. But the current thinking is more like it's more the result of a cascade of things that happen before, mostly rooted in chronic inflammation in the brain or acute inflammation. So amyloid is certainly important, but it's not the only thing. But unfortunately, it's been the only thing drug companies have really been targeting.
Yeah, I think that was the kind of the main, I guess, conclusion that comes out of this. And like you're saying, it doesn't mean that amyloid isn't an important part of Alzheimer's dementia. It is an important part of it. Still a lot to learn about it. But at the same time, at a critical, they call it a critical node of science. That is like when we're just about to embark on a lot of different directions. What, you know, the risk that we always have in any scientific endeavors and any sort of medical research is that we focus too much in one area when there are a lot of other areas that we can pursue. And that, I think, you know, that might have happened, you know, to some extent here. And I remember, you know, you just going to these Alzheimer's Association international conferences and seeing such a small little group of people working on nutrition. And like, you know,
so the flip side is that there's more awareness now that like amyloid is not the only thing that leads to Alzheimer's, and that, you know, Lancet came out, a couple years ago with their updated guideline saying that there were 12 modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's. And, from obesity to diabetes to lack of early childhood education to hypertension to hearing loss. I mean, there's just so many of them that can be targeted with just basically education, not drugs. And so I think the flip side is that maybe we'll have more attention in the prevention side. We'll get more great studies like the ones we're talking about today that we've seen.
Yep.
Hopefully that will be the silver lining of this whole, unfortunate controversy.
Yeah, and a lot more interest in a lot more different areas, and then we just kind of blow up from there and start to explore all these different paths that are
like
out there.
The tau paper.
So
the tau paper is super interesting.
Oh my word, that tau paper. Okay, so we'll get to that in a moment here. I'm gonna steal an analogy from a person named Dr. Dung Trin, who's a great Alzheimer's disease research advocate, and he said, he equates the latest drugs in Alzheimer's like Aduhelm and like lecanemab, which is that other Biogen drug they're gonna release data on it, but they say it's gonna be somewhat of an improvement, right?
Right.
But he equates it to like the very first cell phones people had when there was just a giant box and it worked really bad. Yeah. Like, they'd always disconnect and they were just really clunky. And that's basically kind of like where we're at when it comes to drugs and therapies for Alzheimer's. It's just really clunky.
Not very sophisticated.
Not sophisticated at all. But you know what? It's a first step. It's one factor, like you're saying. It's one factor out of many. And once we collect all those factors and we act at the right time, which could, preferably before you're diagnosed, then of course, we can really make a huge impact on, against this disease. So, but anyway, so that's a little bit of the controversy there. Don't debunk, or don't throw out all of amyloid or the plaques theories, but at the same time, know that we're going in a lot of great directions from here. Okay, women. All right, so another great year in women's health. I think we started the year talking about Lisa Mosconi's work. We did an Instagram live in February or so this year, and I got the paper here, and she was summing up all of her research over the past few years in one of these huge papers. But what else? I mean, where do you want to take us from here, Annie, on women's health and dementia?
Well, just to summarize some of the most important things that Lisa Mosconi and also Dr. Roberta Britton at the University of Arizona and some others have found is that women's reproductive health is intricately tied to their cognitive health later in life. So we know that estrogen, both either estrogen that you take in a pill form or some other type of estrogen you take exogenously, and the estrogen that your own body makes are protective on the brain when it comes to Alzheimer's and dementia later in life. So as a woman, the longer you've been exposed to estrogen, either your own hormones or hormones that you took as a prescription, the lower your risk of Alzheimer's. And I think that's something that's just been worked out in the last couple of years that we did not know before. And so it's so important to get the word out. Number one, because a lot of women are on hormone therapy after menopause, and they feel like it's a bad thing to do when actually the studies are very positive. The studies show that women who take hormones for 10 years or more after menopause have dementia risk reductions around 40 to up to 55%. Another huge factor on top of nutrition, exercise, sleep, all the other things we talk about. So I think it's important for the women on hormones to know that, if they're a good choice for it, if their doctor, has talked to them about that, then it's fine to be on it. And it's also really good for your brain to stay on it. There's no cutoff that tells you have to go off. It's more of a year by year decision with you and your physician. So I think that's really good news. The other thing that Dr. Mosconi is working out is what happens at menopause that makes a woman's brain vulnerable to dementia. And specifically, why does amyloid start to build up in the brain at menopause? Why does tau protein, which is similar to amyloid in the way it destroys brain cells, how does that also build up in the brain? And why do women get so many symptoms that are neurological at menopause, like overwhelming brain fog and fatigue and things like that, memory loss, problems with word retrieval? All of these are really common symptoms of menopause. So the important thing to know is that this is all being worked on. It's a hot area of research. We know that something that's called a bioenergetic crisis happens to women when they're going through menopause, when their estrogen levels, tank, many times during the month. so does the glucose in their brain. And the brain can no longer take up glucose, yet they can't really access ketones either, the brain's other source of energy. So that can account for the overwhelming lethargy, fatigue, sort of like the slowing down, the grinding of the gears of your brain. And it's been called brain fog too, that happens at menopause. It completely explains it. So the next step is to figure out like which women are more vulnerable at menopause for one trajectory, which could be at risk for cognitive decline, and how do we intervene? How do we intervene to help them, besides taking hormone therapy if appropriate? That's a really hot area of research right now.
And what would you say to people who would want to say, oh, well, I didn't take hormone therapy after menopause, so I'm going to jump on it now, 10 years later? What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's not appropriate. It's actually contraindicated. You're probably not going to find a doctor that's very happy to do that for you. But I would go talk to, your physician, maybe get some additional opinions from a cardiologist or a reproductive endocrinologist, just someone who specializes in hormone therapy. But the reason that it's recommended you take hormones within 5 years of when you become menopausal is because there may be more risks if you wait longer. The hormones also protect your heart. And women, when they're not on hormones, their risk of heart disease starts to climb. After 10 years after menopause, the risk of heart disease in a woman is about the same as that in a man. So we catch up rather rapidly, mostly because our estrogen's been helping us out all those years. So it's not appropriate to say, you know what, I'm 65, I didn't get on the estrogen before, I'm going to get on it now. But it would be worthwhile seeing a cardiologist and seeing if there's something else you could do to reduce risk.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people were probably, maybe thinking about that, or, yeah. So for some of the things that have happened since February, since we last spoke, where do you want to go from there, Annie? What do you want to jump into?
Well, let's talk about that. The study about the tau protein deposition in women, because I think that study is really pertinent to what we were just discussing. One of the recent findings is that tau protein, which is another abnormal protein like amyloid, preferentially accumulates in the brains of some women, especially at menopause. And this paper is really, like, I'm not a biochemist, so it took me a really long time to read this, but I think what I got out of this, correct me if you're wrong, is that we know women have more Alzheimer's than men. Women accumulate more tau protein than men. Menopausal transition may trigger this accumulation of tau, which may be one of the reasons why women are afflicted more. And the discovery was that there's an enzyme linked to the X chromosome called USP111 that augments tau aggregation. So
USP11,
11, just one, just two ones.
2 ones,
USP11 sounds like a highway. Tau aggregation is associated with cognitive impairment. Okay. So, talking about like getting out of the whole narrow-mindedness of only targeting amyloid, what if this enzyme could be targeted? And what if women who are perimenopausal, who are at risk for tau aggregation based on a PET scan or something like that, could be identified as being at high or low risk for this? I see there's a lot of potential here.
There is. I'll try to pipe in here and give some thoughts.
Please do.
This is an amazing study. I was reading it earlier today and just trying to highlight through it. It's great, amazing research done at Case Western University in Ohio. And so like you were saying, they said, okay, we noticed that tau deposition is greater in women, even when they're healthy women, same age as men, so they said, but what's the mechanism that causes it? Because that we know it's there, but how does it get there? And I think the first jump they made was they said, let's just look at ubiquitins as a possible way that this could happen. Ubiquitins, and these ubiquitins basically are these proteins that tag other proteins, and that they're tags that say this protein's got to go. So ubiquitins can tag tau, and they could tag it, and now tau is going to get consumed and swept away, and it's gone now, thrown out with the trash, basically. But USP11, like you mentioned, that is a deubiquinator. Okay, so it untags.
Great word.
It untags stuff. So they go on, they tag tau, ubiquitous tag tau, and they say, okay, it's going to be removed now. And then USP11 comes in and says, nope, we're going to untag it. It's going to stick around. We're going to let tau stick around for a little while, you know?
Yeah.
And the thing about it is that was the key kind of like insight that they realized. They're like, well, ubiquitous USP11 is a tau stabilizer. It keeps tau around. And then they looked at USP11 and where it lands, and it's on the X chromosome. And then I learned something new today. Okay, it's on the X chromosome, and
Which women have two of.
women have two X chromosomes, right? Now the thing is that what it does is USP11, it escapes what's called X inactivation. So what happens is that women get two X chromosomes, guys get an X and a Y. But to equalize, right, one of the X chromosomes inactivates, or a lot of the genes in it inactivates, right? So then you're kind of left with the Y impact and the X impact over here. And that extra X is kind of like, whittled away, right?
Yeah.
But some genes evade that, right? And for good reasons, probably. And USP11 is one of them. So you get a double gene dose, and they call that a gene dose. And I was like, got it.
That's really cool.
That explains the kind of like higher levels of activity and heightened level that USP11 has in women as opposed to men, right? Because it's a double X dose, right?
It's a double X dose.
I was like, whoa, but that was really neat. And then they looked at humans and they saw higher amounts in women's brains, and they did the final thing that all scientists do that gets them a paper in Cell, which is one of the big journals out there. They did this thing called a knockout study where they said, okay, so if we really want to prove that USP11 is the culprit here, what we're going to do, we're going to create mice that don't make it at all. Okay, these mice don't make it at all. We genetically engineered them. They don't make USP11. So what happened to the mice was that the mice didn't accumulate the tau. And so and they did all that work, and it's just an amazing study.
It's very well done. Very well done. Yeah, I'd love to see more information about that and how they can exploit that enzyme.
And like you were saying about tau, it really reveals the impact of tau and how these other areas outside of amyloid make a big difference, or could make a big difference. So that I expect that's going to open a lot of doors in the direction of what nutrition can reduce tau in women, and what obviously with drugs too as well. So it's pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we already know that women who are ApoE4 carriers, which is the risk gene for Alzheimer's, they have an accelerated path to Alzheimer's compared to men. So having an ApoE4 for a woman has a different type of risk profile than a man having ApoE4.
That's right. And I don't, and also, one thing I want to mention, because we're saying ApoE4 has a bigger impact in women. We got more tau accumulation in women. It's like women are probably freaking out that menopause happens, but
we have estrogen though.
That's right. No, estrogen, and also
most of our lives, a lot of our lives.
To me, I mean, they're saying, okay, USP11 is, this protein that enables more accumulation of tau, right? In a woman, there's more of it in women than men. Fine, but I'm a huge believer in that biology has its own economy, and there's a good reason for that. There's a benefit to that too that we don't understand either. So there's always this balance happening. I think there's a lot of the economy of biology is very good. It's more efficient than anything else out there, especially our markets and stuff like that. It's just the economy of biology is extremely tight, and there's a reason for that. There's a good reason for that, and there can also be, potentially a bad reason, right? So.
Yeah, we just don't know that much yet.
Yeah, we
or the more we learn, the less we know. I want to touch on one more thing before we leave. Dr. Mosconi's work is that she's at Weill Cornell. She heads up one of the few Alzheimer's prevention clinics in the country, and I've gotten to know her through the Alzheimer's prevention community. And she said, Annie, if you ever come to New York, I want to scan your brain. So I said, oh, sure, Lisa, I'd love to do that. So, fast forward a couple years, and I'm in New York to do a cooking class, and I had some meetings with my publisher, and Lisa's like, I want you to enroll in my
get your brain scanned.
So lo and behold, I ended up spending a couple of days at Weill Cornell. I had 2 PET scans, one for amyloid, one for glucose. I had a brain MRI, like we've been talking about. I had a full panel of blood work. I did cognitive testing, like they do to screen people for cognitive decline. Just, pretty rigorous battery of tests. And, the reason I'm mentioning this is because we need women and men to enroll in studies. And it's just incredibly important to be willing to have your brain looked at, to be willing to have a cognitive test, even if you don't think you're old enough to have one. It's a little bit scary. Yep. My mom has Alzheimer's, so it was a little scary for me to go through all this stuff, honestly. But it's really important, and they got enough funding to repeat this current study that she's doing in 18 months. So I'll be going back in 18 months. Like we said, that 18-month window is a really good time to look at brain structure. And I'll be having it done all over again. So if anyone is interested in enrolling in Dr. Mosconi's study, she's always looking for participants. You can just email me at brainhealthkitchen@gmail.com, and I will connect you with that team.
Yes, and especially if people are a little afraid of cognitive testing, and I'm one of them. It's.
I tried to study for mine.
So yeah, and the thing is, there are learning effects, they call them. When you take it once, you take it twice, you take it a third time, you get better. Actually, it's just a matter of how much better you get versus others.
Yeah.
So just keep going at it, but yeah, that's extremely important, because recruiting for Alzheimer's and dementia studies is extremely hard. That's one of the biggest bottlenecks that prevents research nowadays.
Yeah, so email me and I'll hook you up. It might take you a little while to get back to you. So we've got 2 studies about omega-3s.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to send that over to you because you're an omega-3 specialist.
So I'm going to try. We'll go through them quick. So omega-3s, everybody kind of has this feeling in the public consciousness. Obviously omega-3s are healthy for our brains, and it makes sense mechanistically too, biologically, because omega-3s like DHA and EPA and ALA, they all eventually make their way to the brain and become structural, become part of the structure of neurons or brain cells. And that makes them very, very important. Also, they tamp down on inflammation. They play a huge role in inflammatory processes in the brain and resolving them, meaning causing them to kind of calm down. So they play 2 of these huge roles, right? And so it's never an old story, actually. And there's still so much to talk about here. One thing that hasn't been done before is taking all the studies that have been done in omega-3 dietary intake or supplementary intake and trying to piece it all together and figure out where are we at with it, actually. And that's what the Shirzais have done this year, and in a study that was recently released in a journal. And they have like 42 studies in here, so it was a huge analysis that was done by it was actually a family affair. So Aisha and Dean and Alexander Shirzai all came in on this, and they did a systematic review of all of the studies that have been done in omega-3s and their cognitive impact, specifically neuroprotection. And I'm just gonna wrap it up here because it's a long study here, but I will wrap it up here by saying where they're landing here is that one of the key things that they land at is what they call a threshold effect. Okay, and so there's really a lot of studies that they looked at, but one of the things that they're really trying to help people understand is how to better design future studies, actually. And so that we can better understand who gets the most benefit from either dietary or supplementary DHA and EPA and ALA. And one of the things that they kind of encountered was that we have studies that range where people are taking anywhere from low hundreds, like a couple hundred milligrams a day, to 4,000 milligrams a day, 4 grams.
Yeah, and major dosage problems in terms of
major dosage ranges, things like that. And what they realize is that there's a couple things. If people have a certain baseline level of omega-3s, they don't necessarily see as much of an effect as for people who start with lower levels, right? And I guess that kind of makes sense, from a dietary standpoint. But that's hugely important to help us understand who benefits the most Just like the studies that we spoke about earlier about the mind diet, they're looking at dosing of polyphenols and how much that helps people, and does it help people who are obese or who have, obese in the waist and things like that, like the Green Med study. Here, they're trying to trying to figure out who would benefit the most from omega-3s. And there's a whole nother section there about what types as well. So that's kind of the thinking there. I think the key takeaway for most people here that I'm trying to get at is that we still have a long way to go with omega-3s as far as understanding where the dosing should be exactly for everyone, and who might benefit, what their baseline health characteristics might be, whether or not it's APOE4 or not. But there's a lot of studies here that support the fact that it is beneficial, and it certainly can't hurt, at least up to about 5,000 milligrams a day or so more. So I don't know, what's your take on it, Annie? So
it's a super ambitious study. If you don't know Aisha and Dean Shirzai on Instagram, they're at the Brain Docs. Definitely follow them. All the information that they share is evidence-based, and they're researchers and Alzheimer's specialists themselves, neurologists. They do research. They're whole food plant-based, so if you're interested in that dietary pattern, they have amazing recipes too, and they're really just wonderful, wonderful people. So for them to tackle this ambitious project, I'm just so grateful, because it will lay the groundwork for future studies. The thing that I took home from this study was that DHA and EPA should be taken in a certain ratio, right, of more DHA than EPA, and should be taken in a certain dose. So messing around with smaller doses, or messing around with the wrong ratios is probably just not worth anyone's time or money. And the other thing that I took away, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we still don't know if algae supplements for DHA and EPA are just as good for the brain as those that come from fish oil, like krill. Because we get our fish oil supplements from fish, from high quality krill, like tiny, tiny, tiny fish, right, in the ocean. But people who are whole food plant-based or 100% vegan and don't want to consume any animal products, they get it from an algae supplement. And we still don't know. I want it to be true, because I want people who are following these dietary patterns to get all the same benefits. But I would love to see a study looking at algae versus fish-derived DHA.
That's right. Yeah, the algae derived is what they call a triglyceride form. And so, the funny thing, everybody who might, you can see this in the food chain, right? So algae are floating around, they have a lot of DHA, and that fish come by, chomp it up, right? Or actually maybe the shrimp come by, get it, and the fish eat the shrimp, and it just goes and accumulates.
It's where the fish get it, yeah.
Yeah, and the fish eventually, accumulate DHA in them. So obviously, algae is a logical place to look for DHA if you're vegan or vegetarian. The thing is that when it does make its way into the fish, particularly in certain parts of the fish, like the roe, things like that, and like all eggs, obviously, very high in choline and things like that. It gets functionalized different molecules actually get attached to the DHA and the EPA, and so algae, DHA and EPA are what they call triglyceride, whereas when you get to the fish, some of it's triglyceride, other parts, especially the type taken from the roe, is phosphatidylcholine or phospholipid form, and so
But it gets complicated because not everything crosses the blood-brain barrier to the same degree. So a good question was, how do you know how much DHA to take?
And so yes, so when that was part of their question here, and one way I can answer it is this, and I'll just pull straight from guidelines. so typical dietary guidelines, they don't actually even talk about DHA and EPA as far as U.S. dietary guidelines. All they talk about is ALA, okay, alpha linolenic acid, right? So what they, and that comes from like walnuts particularly, right? And that eventually converts itself into DHA. It's a small percentage that gets converted, but eventually it makes its way into becoming DHA. And what they say there is that if you just want to take it in from walnuts, like ALA, that type of omega-3, you're looking at about 1,600 milligrams a day.
About ALA is great, but that's not like
So
neuroprotective as the DHA and EPA,
so
right?
that's right. Eventually, it has to go through the process of eventually converting itself into
Mm-hmm.
DHA and EPA, and that's down. You're down to like single-digit percentages there, as far as it converting down to DHA, and then eventually making its way into the brain. When it comes to just straight DHA and EPA, American Heart Association says 500 milligrams, a week, is what you're kind of looking at, what you want to kind of get. But I it when it comes to people with APOE4, I'll say I would strongly, this is not medical advice, everyone, but if you happen to know if you have APOE 1 copy or 2 copies, I would dose higher with omega 3s. I get it dietarily. I'd supplement with it. I use the version that we use in our product at NeuroReserve is phosphatidylcholine functionalized DHA, and what APOE4 does is it breaks down the blood-brain barrier and makes it difficult for normal triglyceride DHA to go in. So therefore, we bypass it using that phosphatidylcholine DHA. And there's a different way it gets in through the cell as opposed to around cells, because since they can't do that anymore.
So this is so important. And aren't you one of the people that actually figured this out, that there's a transport mechanism, and what DHA and EPA is bound to is incredibly important.
It dictates
how it actually gets into the brain.
Yeah, and so brains, or the capillaries that line the brain, right, the blood-brain barrier, those capillaries, those endothelial cells that form the tube, they're really tightly linked together, right? And usually in those junctions where they come together, the triglyceride form can attach itself and kind of crawl its way through, almost, right? Diffuse its way through to the other side. Now, with people with APOE4, they tend to have that breakdown happen earlier in their life, and those tight junctions start to fall apart a little bit. Now, you would almost intuitively think that, okay, well, if the tight junction's falling apart, then that would make it easier for it to get in. Actually, that's not the case. The triglyceride DHA relies upon those sidewalls to get in, so then it can't get in anymore. So now you have to go through the cells as opposed to around them. And
we don't want a leaky blood-brain barrier.
So, what's that?
We don't want a leaky blood-brain barrier.
We don't want that. We don't want that at all, And so there's a lot of other, aspects of the mind diet that can help protect the blood-brain barrier and make it, keep it intact. And but yeah, the phosphatidylcholine type DHAs, they can bypass that sort of breakdown and get into the brain more efficiently. So
the dose in Relevate is, very strategic and based on, all this data. Another down and dirty way to know if you're getting enough DHA is DHA makes your blood thin a little bit. So say they did population studies in Japan, and people have different bleeding times in Japan than we have in the US. Probably because they eat so much fish and seafood, so they're getting like food sources of DHA. So bleeding time is just when you cut your finger, and how long does it take to stop bleeding? So when I started taking Relevate, even though I eat a lot of fish and seafood and I'm doing all the right things, I'm like mind diet 100%, right? I noticed my bleeding time increased, and I think that is significant.
Yeah,
the DHA that I'm taking.
Yeah, so I expect everybody on this to go and prick their finger and count it out. And I'm just kidding. So, but
okay. So one more study before we go, because we're almost at the top of the hour. Was the study on middle-aged persons taking omega-3 supplements. This one didn't make the cutoff for the Scherzai paper, and their cognitive function later in life.
Yes. To me, this is an important study. So what happened is that there's something called the Framingham cohort, right? And there's people who they've been following since 1948, and their family members. It's thousands of people. So that's what makes this study significant already, because we're talking about thousands of people now. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, okay, is there a way that we can predict or have some predictive ability aside from let's say raw fatty acid levels in the blood? Like, is there something better out there that we can use to predict people's outcomes who are in midlife, right? And once again, midlife is becoming a very important topic in research. The two studies that we talked about in the MIND study earlier today, both midlife studies they're looking at, right? They're all trying to figure out what's going to stop people from getting Alzheimer's later on rather than waiting until the end, right? So
midlife is a really important time of life to study this.
hugely important. And they said, is there another way to look at omega-3s and to assess them? And what they looked at here is they said, well, let's look and see if there's something called an omega-3 index. And the omega-3 index is simply how much omega-3s have built up in your red blood cells. So red blood cells are tissue, actually. I know they seem like little balls rolling and floating around and stuff like that, but they're actually tissue, right? And then they usually live about maybe 120 days or so, 90 to 120 days, and then they're recycled, right? They die and we make more. And so that's a good amount of time. And that's enough time there where you get some view as not just like your day or a spike, in omega-3 levels and things like that, but this is a reasonable view to what your levels are. And correlating that to MRI and also cognition is very important. And that's what they did in this study. And they basically linked and they said, the omega-3 index, which is the amount of red blood cells or the amount of omega-3s in red blood cells, that's a really good indicator of these sorts of MRI or obviously, brain scans and also positive cognitive effects. And so there's a person there on the study. His name's Bill Harris or William Harris. He's one of the co-authors here.
He's like the father of omega-3s, isn't he?
He is like the
grandfather.
godfather of the omega-3 studies in the blood, right? And right. I had the pleasure of meeting him one time. And so, he's one of the co-authors in the study. And so that's a really neat thing because now if you look up places, there's a few different places that offer like omega-3 index tests. And so this is really a story or a study about how do we measure more easily and more reliably, what our omega-3 levels are so that we can see where we're at, as far as how
we do proper studies going forward and then nail in like the doses and should women take a different dose? Should ApoE4 carriers take a different dose? Yeah, seeing Bill Harris as an author on that story is really reassuring.
Yes, he's a wonderful man. As far as when I met him at he came to a meeting at one of the old companies that I used to work at, and he offered all of us an omega-3 index test. Actually, he's like, "This is something I'm working on. This is you got to try this." So anyway, this was about 6 years ago or something like that. But anyway. So that I think is really important. And they did it in the Framingham cohort, which is a huge number of people. So
and did indeed find that it was associated with reduced cognitive decline with age.
That's right. So that and then also the MRI scans there, as I see here. So yeah. So it's
But if your omega-3 index is high, does that mean it's crossing the blood-brain barrier too? It's a good indication.
Likely, I'd say. I mean, I think what they're trying to do is trying to find something a little better than looking at just simple blood levels of omega-3, and they're trying to step up from that.
Yeah.
And then tying it to crossing the blood-brain barrier. That might be that's a tall order to get through. But it brings us closer because if there's a sustained amount of omega-3s in the bloodstream, obviously then there's more of a likelihood that some of it will cross.
Yeah, there's a sort of a threshold for that.
There's a concentration gradient. Thank you very much.
Concentration gradient. That's what I meant to say.
Yeah, pushing it across. So that's my old chemical engineering coming back. But these are some great work going on in 2022 so far in mind diet studies. And just some controversies that are helping research move forward into better directions, and then also women's research, and then also omega-3s, which are obviously so important and well studied already. And we have a lot of work to go there.
Yeah. So take home messages. Work on your grip strength. So you just do that working out, or if you like to hike or walk, use trekking poles, and that will increase your grip strength. So that's a really good indication. The mind diet reduces open angle glaucoma by as much as, did we say 60%? Was that what they said? 64%?
It was like a ton. Yeah, it was like
crazy.
So
no brainer.
So I'm looking at the abstract. 80 odds ratio decreased 0.8. So that's basically 80%. So
yeah. Wow. I can't wait to talk to my ophthalmologist about that next week.
So
And then if you want to dabble in the green med diet, which I've written about in my newsletter, and I have a pictogram on Instagram, basically it's the Mediterranean diet. I would say follow the mind diet because we know from lots of studies that it's better for reducing cognitive decline. So follow the mind diet and then add walnuts, snack on walnuts, drink green tea, especially if you enjoy it, then drink it. And then eat some of the real high nutrient dense greens. They use a special
yeah.
green, but it doesn't have to be a special green. It could be spinach, it could be Swiss chard, but a hefty serving of greens every day, I think, is the take home point there.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff about to come out, or just great new directions in women's research linking tau to increase risk, which gives us more opportunities to intervene. So that's great, and just keep taking your omega-3s. So you have to do that through diet, and also supplementation as well. Especially if you happen to be APOE4. I shouldn't say positive, but you have a copy of it or two copies.
Yeah, and you don't need an omega-3 index. I mean, I almost got one because I was curious the last time I got blood drawn, but it was really expensive and my insurance didn't cover it. And so I'm just going by my bleeding time.
Yeah. And everybody contact Annie through Instagram and ask her about, bleeding times and things like that.
Oh, and the last thing was, if you want to be part of a study, just go ahead and email me, brainhealthkitchen@gmail.com, and I can connect you with the group at Weill Cornell who's looking for both men and women because they're comparing men and women's brains. So if you're interested in doing that, just let me know.
And we are going to publish or put on the web a written summary of this discussion, actually, and we'll obviously post this video as well. And another thing, go visit Annie. So if this is your first time ever meeting Annie here, Annie's at brainhealthkitchen.com. So all one word, obviously, brainhealthkitchen.com. Just amazing world-class recipes there, just highly innovative. And Annie will soon be, a full-blown published cookbook author specializing in Alzheimer's. It's going to be awesome.
I have the advanced copy here, but I'm not allowed to show it to you yet.
It's under lock and key right now, but it's going to be coming out
in January, but it's available for pre-order.
And of course, if you want to learn more about NeuroReserve, so we're a NeuroReserve, we're a nutrition company focused on brain health, and we have a product called Relevate, and I love the product, obviously.
It's good stuff. I take it every day. My husband takes it. I have all my friends and my entire family on it.
So it's based on the mind diet. It's an extremely powerful diet, and that's the way to go, when it comes to nutrition for brain health. So if you want to learn more there, you can go to neuroreserve.com. And otherwise, thanks so much for hearing these latest developments.
Thanks for joining.
And Annie, I hope you just kind of get over the jet lag and you can just kind of relax for a little bit.
I'm leaving town on Thursday. So yeah, this is a big catch-up week for me.
All right, so get some sleep. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And for those who watch this later on, really appreciate your interest in brain health and nutrition. So
thanks, everybody.
All right, bye, Annie. Bye, everybody.
Bye.